All right, guys, this week you are going to be answering a discussion question in the traditional way. You're going to be typing it out, and I'm just going to have a quick video that you can watch if you want some help with it. But it's going to be about emotions. So let me just kind of recap what has been going on in the novel up until this point that will help you out with this. So this recap and this question really covers pages 236 to 252. So that is chapters 40 through 42 if you're thinking about it in that way. And in these chapters, we'll start with the Joseph chapter. I just have my notes here. I also have my book here if you want to follow along. But starting on page 236 with Joseph, this is when the St. Louis, the ship that they're on, has been officially turned away from Cuba, and they are sailing back or to Europe or someplace else that will take them. So I'm on page 236, and it starts by saying, Miami. They weren't even a day out of Havana. Remember, that's the capital of Cuba. And already the St. Louis was passing the American city. It was so close you could see it from the ship without binoculars. Joseph and Ruthie hung over the rails like everyone else, pointing out hotels and houses and parks. Joseph saw highways and white square office buildings, even skyscrapers, and hundreds of little boats in the harbor. Why couldn't they just pull into Miami and dock there? Why wouldn't the United States just let them in? There's so much land that didn't have buildings on it. Miles and miles of palm trees and swamp as far as the eye could see. Joseph would take it. He would live there. He would live anywhere so long as it was away from the Nazis. But the United States, in the early stages of the Holocaust and World War II, was, shutting their borders to refugees and shutting their borders to immigrants. So even though they're literally within eyeshot of an American city, these people were not allowed in. The small kids don't seem to realize what's going on. It's just another day in the life on this boat where it's better than they were in Europe. So they're just having a grand old time. All the adults understand the seriousness of the situation, that they are being turned away. They have no safe place to go. So they're going to be probably taken back to Europe and back to the Nazis and back to the Holocaust. The only adult who doesn't seem to have an issue with this is Joseph's mother. She is spending her time in the dance hall, just dancing for hours and hours and hours on end. This is not really necessarily what your discussion question is on, but why do you think she would be doing that? Here, her husband is in a Cuban hospital. Who knows what's going to happen to him? Who knows what's going to happen to her and her children? But she's just dancing her days away in the dance hall to whatever music happens to be playing. So everyone else seems to fear for their future in Europe, and she's just dancing. And then in the Isabel chapter, which we're looking at page 243, it starts off saying, Miami, it was like a dream, like a glittering vision of heaven, as if Ivan had opened the gates for them. Everyone stared, stunned, as though they never thought they would ever actually see it. When the lights on the horizon became the faint shapes of buildings and roads and trees, and they knew for sure they were looking at Miami, they cried and hugged each other again. Isabel cried for Ivan, cried because he had been so close and hadn't made it. But her tears for him were mixed with relief that she would make it to the States, and that made her feel guilty and cry even harder. How could she be sad for Ivan and happy for herself at the same time? Crack! Something bent and broke under Poppy's foot, and the boat lurched. Water streamed in from a new crack in the hull, and suddenly all feelings of relief ended. The boat was sinking. So here is Isabel and her family and their neighbors. They are literally within eyeshot of Miami. They can see details on the shore, and their boat is sinking, and they really have no options left to them. Their options or their choices at this point are sink, try to swim, knowing that there's sharks in the water, try and row this sinking boat, and all the while, Isabel's mother is actively in labor, having her brother at that moment. So there is no good options available to them. And then, just as, they're trying to deal with all this new information coming at them, they literally are crossing the path of a U.S. Coast Guard ship. Remember, the law states that if the U.S. Coast Guard picks up people like Isabel and her family while still on the water, they're going to be arrested and sent back to Cuba. If they can make it and literally touch American land, they will be safe and they'll be allowed into the country. So their ship is sinking. They're being trailed by sharks. They have a pregnant woman having her baby, and now they're literally in the pathway of a Coast Guard ship. And then the last part of this chapter is about Mahmoud, and he is going to be like the focus of the discussion question, although you can bring in the other characters, obviously. But Mahmoud's family had a good plan to get themselves to Hungary. They had hired a taxi driver. They said, enough of walking, enough of trying to do things right. Let's just shell out the money. Let's just take a taxi and have him drive us to Hungary. So that all sounds well and good until the man, when they're in the middle of nowhere in the forest, the man pulls over off the road, points a gun at them, and is demanding money. And this chapter starts off on page 247 saying, Mahmoud stared at the gun pointed at him. Was this real, or was he still asleep and having a nightmare? The Serbian taxi driver waved the pistol at Mahmoud's family. You paid 300 euros, he demanded. This wasn't a dream. It was real. Mahmoud had been groggy just seconds before, but now he was wide awake, his heart hammering. His eyes felt dry, even though his shirt still clung to him with sleep sweat, and he blinked rapidly as he looked at his parents. They were already awake, his father hugging the still sleeping Walid protectively. So I had to look it up because I don't have best idea necessarily always about how much foreign money is, but 300 euros comes out to $325. So this man is demanding money basically to not kill them. And in this part here, I mean, I assigned some words to Mahmoud. I don't know if you agree, but I could describe Mahmoud as feeling defeated, feeling helpless. They do agree to pay because what other choice do they have? They're literally in the middle of nowhere with this man pointing a gun, and they don't have any other situation or any other recourse in this situation but to pay. So on the bottom of page 248 it says Mahmoud and his family didn't have to be told twice to get out of the taxi. They threw open the car doors and scrambled outside, and before the doors were even fully closed again, the Volkswagen tore off down the dark road, its red taillights disappearing around a curve. Mahmoud trembled with anger and fear, and his mother shook with quiet sobs. Mahmoud's father pulled them all into a hug. Well, Mahmoud's father said at last, I'm definitely giving that driver a bad review on TripAdvisor. Mahmoud's quivering legs gave out, and he sank to the ground. Tears streamed down his face, as though they'd been held back by a dam before, and now the floodgates had suddenly been opened. He'd had a gun pointed right at his face. As long as he lived, Mahmoud would never forget that feeling of paralyzing terror, of powerlessness. His mother sat down on the road with him and hugged him. Mahmoud's tears came harder, fueled by everything that had come before. The bombing of their house, the attack on their car, struggling to live in Izmir, the long hours in the sea, and of course Hannah, mostly Hannah. So I'm not going to read this whole chapter to you, but it goes on. They're trying to figure out, what do we do now? We're in the middle of nowhere. We have almost no money left. What is our next stop? What do we do now? And so they decide they're going to walk. I mean, what else can they do? And so, they make this decision, and then Mahmoud realizes this whole time his brother's been sleeping. His brother slept through like this hostage situation of them like mentally breaking down. So, kind of what does that tell you about this situation when Mahmoud finally releases all this stress and all this, all these tears, all this upset feeling, and his brother's been asleep the whole while. So here's your question, and I'm going to type it out, but here's what you guys are going to basically be thinking about. So, Mahmoud is sitting there in the middle of the road in the middle of the night, just crying after this gun was pointed at his face. And he's thinking about his younger brother, Walid. He's worried about Walid, who doesn't seem to show any emotion when these bad things are happening. The kid seems to have kind of shut down a little bit. So your question is crying a good thing, or is it a sign of weakness? Think about what Mahmoud's been through. Think about times perhaps when you have cried. Is crying a sign of weakness, or is it sometimes actually a good thing? And do you think that Mahmoud is a strong or weak character, particularly in this moment when he does break down? And what about Walid? Walid this whole time, he's been kind of robotic. Like, he's not showing a lot of emotion. Is he a strong character? Is he like holding it all together and manning up, or is he shutting down? Sometimes you get so overwhelmed and you just kind of go blank. So maybe is that where Walid is at right now? So use this information to help you out in typing out your response, and good luck.